Okay, so for this video, we're going to talk about how to make a slab box or a slab bottle. You're going to have either choice when it comes to what you'd like to make, but prior to this assignment, you should have already made your template out of paper, so you know exactly the dimensions that your box is going to be, and you already have your templates created. So I am going to show you how to make both of these shapes in this video. So I'm going to take my rib and I'm going to rib the texture that from the slab roller off on the front and the back. I'm going to use no water to do this because we do not want our paper to stick to the clay when we go to cut it out. If you absolutely need to, you can use the tiniest bit of water if it seems like it's not smoothing, but really shouldn't be using very much water. So I'm going to take my rib and I'm going to rib the clay and smooth it out. Alright, and then I'm going to flip it over and do the same on the back. Alright, so now I have a ribbed piece of clay. I'm going to take my template and I'm going to start tracing out the shapes from this slab. You only get one shot at rolling out the slab and cutting it, so we don't want to cut one here and then one in the middle and then one up on the corner. We want to fit them as tight as we can, and if we ever have any leftover, this could be a great time. You could share it with a neighbor. We don't want to waste any slab at all, so we're going to try to fit as many as we can. What I don't want to see is you putting the template on the clay and then trying to cut out the shape right with the template on top. It's never going to give you a straight line and all of your pieces are going to be very crooked. So instead, you're going to take your template, you're going to trace your shape and then we would cut after. I'm going to try to get as many of these to fit as I can before I start to cut. Okay, so now I have all 4 of my sides cut out. I have all of this extra slab right here that I'm not using. We never want to waste a slab like this. This could also be where the bottom of my piece is going to go. Right now I don't have a bottom because I have my 4 sides, but eventually I'm going to need a bottom to my piece. So this would be where you would maybe cut out this square and then save it for when you need the bottom, but I would not wedge up all of this good slab. I would try to give it to a neighbor or I would save it in my locker because eventually I'm going to need the bottom to my piece. So now I'm going to cut them out. If you have the option, you want to use one of these tools that has the really sharp edge at the base. These will do, but they're not as sharp and you're not going to get as a straight line. So I'm going to start off by cutting these out. I would recommend that you use a ruler. Some students struggle with cutting straight edges. So I would take my ruler and I would place it at the top, and because the top of this template has a straight edge, I would use my knife, and this is really going to make sure that this line is straight. I also have a straight edge at the bottom, so I would take my ruler, place it there, and then I would cut just the straight part. Now the curved edges I won't be able to use a ruler for, so I'm going to take my knife, but I will not need to use the ruler to do so. And then here is my first slab. So I'm going to put that off to the side and I'm going to cut all 4 of them out. Alright, so if you're going to be doing a box like this, where you're doing a box that's going to need to bend prior to scoring and slipping, first thing I want you to do is very small. We're going to put an arrow facing up, and you're going to go back and erase this arrow eventually. But this is going to be to make sure that when we assemble, we don't accidentally flip these and then do the wrong side up, because then your piece wouldn't match up. So I'm going to put little arrows. Okay, I want to make a note that not every time will you be able to fit all of your templates on one slab. So for this box, no matter how many ways I try to fit it, there's no way I'm going to be able to get more than one of these squares cut out. So I put my square right in the middle. I traced it. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line my ruler up with the edge, and I'm going to cut out this square. And because there's no way for me to cut out two, what you're gonna have to do is take your scraps, and while they're still plastic, you're going to need to wedge up the remainder of your clay, and then you're going to put it back on the slab roller and roll out another slab for the last piece that was not able to fit. So I'm going to take out the part that I'm going to keep, and then all of these scraps, you're going to go back to the wedging table, add some water, wedge it up, put it back on the slab roller, roll out a new slab, and then recut your pieces. So sometimes it's going to take more than one slab to get all four or however many slabs that you need, but you'll need to use your scraps to cut out the rest of them. So now we need to get these to be leather hard. If you try to assemble your box and it is not leather hard, it is very challenging, and it's also going to make your box warp and just not look neat. So what you're going to do is when it's time to wrap your pieces up for tomorrow, we're going to take a piece of newspaper, and the newspaper is going to help us get some of the water out of this plastic clay, and it's going to help turn it leather hard. So I'm going to take a piece of newspaper, and I'm going to start with one of my pieces of clay. I'm going to place it on the newspaper, and I'm going to fold the newspaper over, and then I'm going to take my next slab, and when you want to make sure when you place it on top that you don't just place it kind of off-centered, because now wherever this dries, it's going to have a little warp on where the other piece of the clay is. We want to line them up perfectly. So I'm going to feel for the edges of the clay, and I'm going to make sure it's lined up perfectly with the one underneath it. Then I'm going to take the newspaper, I'm going to fold it over. I'm going to take my next slab, and same thing, if you just kind of push it over here, there's a chance that this edge right here isn't supported and it's going to warp in your locker. So check that it is lined up perfectly with the piece underneath it. And then I'm going to fold the paper back over, take my last slab, and check that it lines up. Now you can't just leave it like this. If you put it in your locker like this, it'll turn bone dry, and then you would have to start all over from scratch because your pieces would be too hard to assemble. So now I'm going to take this package of slabs. I'm going to take my bag. We don't want to spray it because we are encouraging the clay to turn leather hard, but you still have to bag it. I'm going to put it in my bag. I'm going to fold it over. And then now, the next day when I come to class, I should have leather hard pieces of clay ready to assemble. So it's the next day, and these have now been sitting up for 24 hours or so. So the newspaper has sucked up the majority of the water out of these 4 slabs. So what you need is a soft, leather hard piece of clay. Soft leather hard means that there is some give to this clay. So if I were to try, I can bend it, but it is not plastic. So if I put it on my hand right now, it's staying straight. It's not trying to bend. It's not floppy, but there is some give to it. So if I were to put my thumbs on the back and push, it's not going to snap. There's movement, but it's strong. And so this is able to stand up on its own. And when I put it next to another piece of clay, it's going to stand straight and it's not going to fall over. The other reason I want these to be a soft leather hard is because my type of template, it needs to be able to touch the other piece of clay, and it needs to be able to bend to touch the top and then bend to touch the bottom. If this was straight leather hard, it would snap. And so if your clay is too hard, all you need to do is take a wet paper towel, place it on top of each, and maybe in about 5 minutes, that clay will have absorbed the water and it will be ready to bend. If you're doing a box shape where you don't need the top and the bottom to touch, then you can maybe even be using a straight leather hard piece of clay. But my clay right now is a soft leather hard. I'm also going to check my arrows. So I see that both my arrows are pointed down. I wouldn't want this one up and then this one down. They're not going to match up correctly. I want them to both have the same arrow. So both of these are going to face down. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get them to touch. I'm going to take the 2 sides and I'm going to bend them so that the tops and the bottoms are both touching. And so that's going to be the side of my box. I'm going to go ahead and do that to all 4 sides just to make sure everything's going to match up. So I'm going to take these 2, and then my next side, the arrow is pointed down, and then this arrow also points down. I'm going to line them up, and I'm going to just gently bend to make sure that everything is going to touch. And then this one I'm going to pick up. These 2 are going to be touching, so I need to bend the clay around. And then this will be my last point. And if I'm confused, I know both my arrows need to point down. And so now this bends around, and then these 2 are going to touch. So now I have all of my slabs ready. So I'm going to take some water. These 2 are the outside edges. So I'm going to be scoring on the seam right here. And then these 2 are the inside edges. So I have to score on the outside edges of these 2. Alright, so when I go to assemble the box, these 2 are going to stay on the outside edge, and these 2 are going to be on the inside. So I'll start with this first one. I'm going to take these 2 seams. This is the outside, this is the inside. I'm going to roll starting at the bottom till I get up towards the top, and I'm just going to squish them together. I am going to go back and spackle that seam eventually, but I'm going to try to get my box to stand up first because it's harder to let this just sit on the table without the other side helping it out. So I'm going to line them up, and then I'm going to do the same for this seam. So this side's going to go on the inside edge, and it's going to roll around. I've already scored and slipped, so now all I have to do is stick them together. It does help to have an extra hand. So for the assemblage, you might have a partner help you hold some of your pieces up while you are squishing the seams together. And then finally, I'm going to take my last slab and I'm going to bend that one. This one goes on the outside edge. These 2 are the outside, these 2 are the inside. And then I'm just going to stick them together, but because I already scored and slipped, this is going to go pretty quickly. So again, this has to be a soft leather hard. It's not plastic, but it's not leather hard. It's right in between the two stages. So the last thing is there's just going to be a lot of cleanup. So these aren't going to line up perfectly at first. I'm going to have to flip them over. And you can see some of my seams over here aren't even touching. Alright, so now I'm just going to be finishing up the box. I have to spackle. I want to spackle the outside seam and the inside seam. The inside seam is a little bit harder to do because you have a smaller area to work with, but with this hand supporting on the outside, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to clean this line up. So adding some water. I'm going to add a couple of score lines in there. This is on the seam. And then I'm going to take some spackle and coils. I'm going to dip the coil into some water, and then I'm going to take that coil, I'm going to place it on the seam, and then I'm just going to blend that coil in. So I'm going to lift it up so you can see. You can see inside I have the coil and I have the seam, and then now I'm just going to blend so I'm going to do that on all 4 seams, and then after you do that we have to also do the outside seam. The outside seam is not going to be very pretty right off the bat. It's going to look something like that. It's going to be very sloppy. So we're going to take a tool and we're going to get a little bit of water on it. So we're going to put some water. You're going to score. And then you're going to take a little bit of spackle, like this, put some water on it, put it right in the seam, and then we're going to blend. Right, so we're going to do that on all 4 of those seams. Okay, so I've done all my sealing. Everything has a seam that is gone. I've done all the spackling. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of clay and I'm going to place my box over that piece of clay. I'm going to take a needle tool or a knife and I'm going to trace on the outer edge of my box until I get the square that's going to match up with the box. Now that I have the square, I'm still going to use a ruler to cut it out. So I'm going to line the ruler up with that straight line. Alright, so now I'm going to take my box, flip it upside down, and then I'm going to take my square, place it at the base, and I'm going to score and slip this onto the bottom. And then after I score and slip, my box is complete, and then you would do the Sgraffito application all over the outside. Okay, there's a few ways to assemble a box that is somewhat like this. Some of you have shapes where you don't have your bottom yet, so you would score and slip your 4 edges, or some of you have 5 together where they meet in the corners, and then after you have them scored and slipped, you would then take this whole piece, you would place it on top of a slab, and then you would just trace around the outside edge, and then you would score and slip your base onto it. If you already have the base pre-made and cut out, Then you will take your base, and we are going to score and slip these edges onto the outside edge, so these would actually touch the table. If you do it like this, that is also another option, but that would mean that you would have to trim the long sides, because if I put all 4 of these up together, these long sides would not fit. You would need to trim them to fit. If you put them on the outside, then they should all match up, where you would just need to score and slip these together onto the seam, and then this one's going to get scored and slipped facing up, and then you would score and slip this one onto the outside like this. So I'm going to go ahead and score so you can see how to seal up the seam. So I'm going to take some water on the seam right here. These are already leather hard. I just really want to emphasize that you can't score and slip a box together if it is not leather hard to start. I'm going to take the tool, only score the area that you're going to not be seeing, or else you have a lot more cleaning up to do. I'm going to score this edge. And then when I put these two together, you should see some water squeezing through the seam. That means that there's enough slip. And then I'm going to take some spackle as a coil, put some water in the seam, roll out the coil. I'm going to place that on the seam, and then I'm going to do my blending. Use your backhand for support as you are sealing up this inside seam. And we want this to look really nice because this is a box, so when you take off the lid you will be able to see into it. So take your time to make this seam look nice and clean. Alright, so I'm going to do that for all 4 sides. Alright, so now that I've scored and slipped the box up, you also need to make sure that you're spackling these corner pieces. So where the two come together, you're going to put some water, score, take a coil, place that into the seam, and seal up. And then I would do that in all 4 corners. So now I've flipped the box over so you can see the bottom seams, and this is also an area that's going to need a lot of attention. So you're going to put water on these 4 seams at the bottom. So a lot of making a box is just doing a lot of spackling. So I'm going to score this corner right here, take some spackle, put that in the seam, and then blend. So I'm going to do the spackling on all of these 4 sides. And then you also need to check that wherever these back 2 corners came together, this is going to need some spackle as well. So after you assemble the box, it is a lot of scoring, slipping, spackling, making sure all the seams are nice and crisp. We want to make sure that our edges are straight. This should be straight if you use the template and you cut it correctly. But if not, you would come back and you would level those out. I also have a piece right here for the lid. So finally, I will take that last piece and I will check to make sure that everything matches up. There's lots of different ways you can do lids, and at that point, if you get to where you want to do a lid, I would probably ask you to do some looking up on different shapes of lids that you can do. From this point, I will just probably help you out if you have questions on how to do a lid, but I wanted you to at least see how to assemble the box out of slabs. Okay, so to assemble the bottle, I have my 2 sides, and they are both leather hard, so you should have already done the process of wrapping them with newspaper. There's a little bit of bend to them, but they are not plastic, because when I go to stand these up, I don't want them to flop. So I have my one side here, and then your 2 strips, you do want them to be able to be bent, because I'm going to need to do the shape of this side here. If they were leather hard, I wouldn't be able to bend them. So you want them to be a soft leather hard. If they are not able to bend, then just wrap a wet paper towel in them for about 5 minutes, and then it'll re-wet the clay that it will be able to get some water into it. I'm going to start off by lining up where the top is, and I'm going to just outline my piece with this first piece of clay. And if you can see, I'm doing this on top of the clay, so we're not going to go off the side because then the top part would not fit. I'm going to do it on top. Sometimes students will like to do it where there's a little bit of a gap. So when you go to put your top piece over it, you would be able to see this inside seam right here, or you can choose to go straight on the seam. I'm going to line it up. Then I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm going to take the clay and I'm going to bend it to the shape. And these have already been pre-measured, so I know exactly how long they need to be. And then I'm just going to let them sit there for a little bit so that they can get used to their new shape. At this point, I'm going to check the edges. If this does not line up, you can see I have a little bit of an extra right here. I will then just take my knife. I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to mark about where I'm going to cut this piece, because right here, this is a little bit too long. And then using my ruler, I will line that up so that it is straight with the edge, and then I'm going to cut off this extra piece because I ended up not needing that. And then once I put it back on, it should match up exactly. So before I do anything else, I'm going to start the scoring and slipping. So I'm going to get some water and a scoring tool. I'm going to score on the top. So when this comes off, I'm scoring on the top. I'm not scoring on the edge. So we're going to make sure that these go on top. So I'm going to take these off and I'm going to let them sit off to the side, holding their shape while I score and slip. I'm going to take some water. I'm going to put that on the top of the clay, not on the edge. And then I'm going to do some scoring lines. And then I'm going to be scoring the part that's going to touch. So it's going to be this edge right here. I'm going to take some water and I'm going to score. And if you can't tell, there's lots of water between the two pieces. It's almost kind of squeezing through. And then I'm checking that it's lined up perfectly. And then I'm going to do the same on this side. And then I will do the same on the bottom. The bottom piece is going on the top as well. So if it can't quite fit, you can trim it. This one fits because I've already pre-measured it. So I'm going on the top. A little tip is I want you to put the top slightly higher up than the actual bottom, because when this goes to sit on the table, we want these edges to sit on the table first. If this sits on the table before your corners, it's going to rock and it's not going to be flat. So kind of push this up ever so slightly before you add the top, and that's going to make sure that the only part that touches the table are the two edge sides, and that will keep your piece to be stable and it won't wobble. Next, we're going to be spackling the inside. So I'm going to take some extra clay, I'm going to roll out some coils, and we're going to seal up the inside. Okay, I'm going to take some water, and then inside the seam, I'm going to add some slip. I'm going to score just ever so slightly. I already have some score lines previously. And then I'm going to take a coil that I've already rolled out. I'm going to put the coil in the seam. And then you can use anything to blend it. You can use a paintbrush, you can use the end of a tool. I'm going to use a paintbrush. I'm going to push that coil into the seam and I'm going to blend it. I'm actually going to use the end of the paintbrush. It's going to work a little bit easier. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So now that I've sealed up these inside seams, I'm going to score the surface. This is what the top part of my bottle is going to adhere to. Lots of water, and then we're going to score. Now this is the back side. This is the part I'm going to place down. So I'm also now going to score the edges that it's going to touch on this side of the bottle. So a little bit of water. And then when you go to attach this, make sure that this piece of clay is leather hard, or at least a soft leather hard. If it is plastic, when you go to put it on top, it's just going to bow in, and then you're always going to have this dent on your bottle. So make sure that this piece is strong enough to support itself when you place it on top. And then now I'm just going to line everything up. If I notice that I have a little bit of areas that they are wider, then before I attach this, I might take my hand inside and try to push out the seams so that everything is touching. And then you will have a chance later to clean some of these edges up. So I'm going to put that down and clean everything up. So this is hard because you can't go back in and place the seam. So you just have to push down on this edge really well before. And then now that I have placed it, I'm going to stand it up. And then this is where you're going to do some cleaning. So you can see that this doesn't line up the best because it was laying on its back. So now I'm going to take some time. I'm going to make sure that all of these line up. It might require that you do a little bit of trimming, so I can trim the top with my knife. I can take a carving tool and trim some of these edges. But the last thing we're going to do is we're going to spackle our seams up. So you can see this outside does not look very nice. I'll turn it like this so you can see it better. This outside edge does not have the outside spackle, the inside was spackled. So when I go to line them up, if I notice that this edge is a little bit wider than the other side, I can take my knife and I'm just going to follow the shape of the bottle and I'm going to cut that part off. And then I'm going to spackle this seam, and then you won't really be able to tell that it ever was cut. So by taking little pieces of clay, I'm going to get them wet. I'm going to put water on the seam, and I'm going to score, and then take some spackle, place that in the crack. And then you're going to blend the seam. So we're doing that all down the front on this side, and then I'm also going to flip it over, and you're going to do the same on this side. So this is where you can see you have a lot of cleaning up to do. So now I've gone back and I did all my spackling. I sealed up the seams on the fronts and the backs. This is really important because if your piece were to crack, it's going to crack right on the seam because of scoring and slipping. So I'm also going to go back and spackle just to make sure, especially on that one side that I wasn't able to spackle from the inside. You want to clean that up. And then now that I have everything ready to go, then I would start the sgraffito. So before you even go to cut out your slabs and assemble them, you would already have transferred that image onto the clay. So right now, if I were to sgraffito this, I would already be able to see what I would be sgraffitoing. And then I'm going to paint that with the black underglaze, let that dry, and then the last step is to do the sgraffito application.